let's dive into more season 1 goodness with the episode Culture Shock. And yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that I want to point out with this episode, so let's dive right in. Now, at the very start of this episode, Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob, and Squidward are hanging out at the Krusty Krab, trying to come up with a way to bring in more customers. Mr. Krabs tried to do a free salad bar, but this failed. But the crew eventually come up with the idea to hold a talent show, which Squidward, as you can imagine, is like instantly excited for, since he thinks that this is his chance to just show off how awesome and talented he is. But before we get into the actual talent show itself, there's a weird little background detail in the Krusty Krab during these opening scenes that I noticed. It's really weird. And just saying, it might sound like a mistake at first, but this whole video is going to be on Easter eggs and production details. Normally in season 1, okay, the tables and chairs inside the Krusty Krab look like this, all right? They have this like classic barrel design for the chairs. If we go back to Help Wanted, the first episode, we can see that they look like this. And if we take a look at like any other random season 1 episode other than Culture Shock, and yeah, they look the same way. The chairs are just regular barrels. But for some reason in Culture Shock, the chairs are randomly drawn differently. Instead of just being normal barrels, they look more like barrels that were carved into like an actual chair shape. What's funny is normally before this, right? Like, as I said, the chairs are normally just regular barrels, but if we go to Mr. Krabs' office in other episodes, the chairs look like how they look in Culture Shock, where they're carved into chairs. So what I think happened here is that the artists made a little bit of a mistake. They got the chairs in Mr. Krabs' office confused with the barrel chairs that are supposed to be in the regular Krusty Krab. It's also worth noting that later on in the episode during the talent show, they use these weird chairs, so that might have been why. But you get the point here. For some reason in Culture Shock, they like changed the design of Krusty Krab chairs. I don't know why. It goes right back to normal right after this episode though. But yeah, that's not the only Krusty Krab detail worth mentioning in this opening, as during that same scene, the Krusty Krab drive-thru can be seen in the background right here. And this is actually the first episode where the drive-thru was drawn into the show. And to be honest, like to be totally honest with you guys, I completely forgot that this was even a thing for a while. But this was probably because this detail became really inconsistent later on. For example, in the first 3 seasons, the drive-thru was shown pretty often during inside shots of the Krusty Krab. So it kind of just blended in, but then after season 3, it just randomly vanished. As you guys know, after season 3, the SpongeBob production team underwent a lot of changes. For example, Steven Hillenburg left, and yeah, season 4 really did launch a different era for SpongeBob. So my assumption is that somebody, like one of the artists on the production team, may have left, and then the new artists didn't know to draw this drive-thru window because it just disappears after season 3 for multiple seasons. But then here's the kicker: years later in season 8, there was an entire episode about the Krusty Krab getting a drive-thru. And the writers were so out of touch with the lore of SpongeBob that I guess they forgot that the Krusty Krab technically already had one. So instead they came up with this story where like a hole was made in the Krusty Krab and then Mr. Krabs turns it into a drive-thru. But the point here is that the drive-thru was first introduced in Culture Shock, and then it was just removed for years. I don't know why. But yeah, let me know in the comments, did you guys ever notice this, that in seasons 1, 2, and 3 there was a drive-thru? I never noticed. Like, now that I'm rewatching all these episodes, I can see it right there in plain sight. But moving on, a few days after Mr. Krabs comes up with the talent show idea, the plan actually works. And the Krusty Krab is packed with customers, including SpongeBob's parents, Harold and Margaret SquarePants, who show up to, of course, watch their son perform. Now, in broadcast order, SpongeBob's parents first appeared in Home Sweet Pineapple, making their debut in that episode. But in terms of production, right, Culture Shock is actually really important because this seems to be where the characters were first created and finalized. Culture Shock was actually made before Home Sweet Pineapple, despite the fact that Home Sweet Pineapple aired before it. But yeah, the production team even made a model sheet for them specifically connected to this episode, as you can see from the text on the model sheet, which of course supports the idea that they were originally designed for Culture Shock. But yeah, like I said, because everything aired out of production order, viewers ended up seeing them in Home Sweet Sweet Pineapple first, but in terms of like writing and the art and the actual making of the show, Culture Shock is where they truly made their debut to the series. Also, just saying real quick, this is a very random one, but in that same scene where Mr. Krabs introduces himself to Harold and Margaret, Patrick appears to be wearing the same exact suit that he wore back in Home Sweet Pineapple, that episode we just mentioned. It's a cool detail, but I'll be honest, I don't know if this was intentional, especially considering that this episode was made before Home Sweet Pineapple. But either way, this was most likely the art team just reusing an asset. Like, I'm doing a side by side, you can see it's the same outfit and same hat, but I think the art team was just feeling a little lazy and they just copied and pasted that outfit. And you can't really blame them, okay? 2D animation's really hard. Okay, let's get into the real meat and potatoes of this episode, as once the talent show gets going, this episode actually introduces a huge number of new background characters. Around 25 or 24 new character designs or variants were made for Culture Shock, and the reason comes down to the setting. As you can see, this isn't just a normal Krusty Krab crowd scene, it's a talent show, so the audience needed to look a little more dressed up and event specific. And I mean, by this point, the show already had a shit ton of different incidentals created, but instead of just filling the room with the same regular fish we've seen already a ton of times, the production team created a bunch of new fancy variants. And there's actually a name for them. They're referred to as the F incidentals, but they're all basically just like dressed up versions of existing incidental characters. But it is cool that 24 of them were made just for this one section of an episode. Like I said, like they could have just used the normal crowd models, but they actually made the Krusty Krab feel like it was hosting a special event by doing this. Now, on top of all of those fancy variants, Culture Shock also introduces one new regular incidental character, and that's Incidental 95. And I mean, let's be real, she isn't necessarily one of the most recognizable background characters, but she has a small role in this episode as a reporter covering the Krusty Krab talent show. Now, here's a little bit of SpongeBob lore for you guys. I like covering this whenever I talk about the incidentals, but after this episode, she disappeared for years before eventually returning in Whatever Happened to SpongeBob, where it seems that she's relocated as she's shown to be working at the New Kelp City Bank. So I guess she moved away from Bikini Bottom for a while. What's interesting about this one incidental is that she was clearly originally going to be connected to the Bikini Bottom news crew team, where she would have been used alongside characters like Perch Perkins. But that concept, I guess, just didn't really stick. Since she's come back, she stayed pretty rare, only popping up here or there every few seasons. But yeah, she made her debut in Culture Shock. Now, after the crowd is set up, the episode starts to focus more on SpongeBob and Squidward trying to run the show backstage. You know, running a talent show is probably pretty hard. I play in a band and we run all of our own shows independently, and holy shit, is it a lot of work. So I understand what SpongeBob and more importantly, what Squidward is going through in this episode. But luckily for us fans, some early sketches and storyboard panels from this specific part of the episode have surfaced over the years. And you guys know me, what I love to do is I love to line this art up with the finished episode, which gives us an early look at some of the scenes. One of the scenes is when SpongeBob shows Squidward all of those Mr. Clean parody products, and another one shows when SpongeBob was displaying his mopping routine. There aren't any major changes from the final cut, as you can see, but it's just cool to see that, you know, a scene like this starts with a sketch or a storyboard, and then by the end, it turns into a full-on freaking episode like this. But of course, the real main event of this episode, let's be freaking real, guys, is Squidward's performance. I mean, it's one of the most memorable Squidward moments from season 1, if you ask me, and he goes all out with his dance moves, only for the audience to completely hate it. Without a doubt, though, his dance moves have become pretty iconic over the years. And just like those scenes with SpongeBob and Squidward, there have also been some storyboard shots and sketches for this scene that have been released as well. I got my hands on these thanks to the SpongeBob wiki, so shout out to them. They show early shots of some of his dance moves, and of course, let's take a look at them with the final episode. And yeah, it's just cool stuff, man. Now, speaking of that same performance, it actually became memorable enough that the show has referenced it years later. For example, Squidward does one of the same dances from Culture Shock in the episode Pat Hearts Squid. Cat Art Squid is more of a modern SpongeBob episode, so it's cool to see that the production team hasn't forgotten about Squidward's iconic dance moves. But also, there's a quick Easter egg during the ending credits of the second SpongeBob movie where, look, Squidward does some of his same dance moves. Okay, and one more thing about this episode before we move on that a lot of you may have caught already, but the whole Squidward live part of Squidward's routine is a clear parody of Saturday Night Live. The way Squidward is introduced, the staging, and even the music as he comes out all feel inspired by SNL. I mean, especially the music, if we compare the two, we can very clearly hear it. But yeah, that pretty much does it for this episode. There wasn't a ton of like crazy production details as you guys seen, but there was some interesting stuff. And either way, I want to cover every single SpongeBob season 1 episode, even the ones that aren't filled to the brim with random lore and trivia. But I hope you guys learned something new. The episode Fun is another really important SpongeBob Season 1 episode, since it gives us one of the first major SpongeBob and Plankton storylines after Plankton's debut. Now at the very start of the episode, Plankton pulls off another scheme and actually manages to steal a Krabby Patty, which leads to this pretty insane chase scene where SpongeBob hunts him down all across Bikini Bottom. They eventually end up in the downtown area, and this section actually introduces a brand new location, the Magic Shop. It's a really quick part of the chase, but it's still cool because this shop is a fairly rare location. I mean, after this episode, it would only go on to appear in one other episode, that being You Don't Know Sponge, as you can see in these clips right here. But also, a fun fact is that the Magic Shop also appears in the PC version of Battle for Bikini Bottom. But I mean, outside of those appearances, this location has basically been abandoned since season 7. Now, because that opening chase scene takes place in downtown Bikini Bottom, the production team needed some background characters to fit the busier city vibe. And that's where these city crowd incidentals come in. These dudes are pretty interesting because they're not normal incidentals in the way most background fish are. Usually one incidental number equals to one character, not including variants. But here, each city crowd incidental is made up of a small group of fish, despite being categorized as one single incidental. For example, City Crowd Incidental 1, City Crowd Incidental 2, and City Crowd Incidental 3 are each technically treated like individual character models, even though they're made up of multiple fish grouped together. Now during Plankton's chase scene, we can spot City Crowd Incidental 1 right before SpongeBob pops his head from the sewer. They're in the background right behind him. Then City Crowd Incidental number 2 appears shortly after SpongeBob spots Plankton again in the crowd. And then City Crowd Incidental number 3 shows up after SpongeBob looks through the binoculars. A fun fact here is that there was actually a 4th City Crowd Incidental planned for the episode, and it even had a full model sheet made, depicting a bunch of worker fish. However, it was eventually scrapped entirely. But yeah, these city crowd incidentals would still be reused many times later. For example, one of the anchovies from City Crowd number 2 randomly appears decades later in a season 15 episode called A Fish Called Sandy. Now, along with those grouped city characters, Fun also introduced a few more background characters that are honestly pretty forgettable, but still worth mentioning. During the chase, we're introduced to the cowboy fish and his girl counterpart. Yeah, these two are both pretty rare, especially the cowboy fish, who has appeared in fewer than 5 episodes. Or actually, his girl counterpart is even more rare, only showing up like 2 or 3 times since her debut. But also, this episode introduced incidentals 114 and 115, who honestly look very similar to the crowd city fish, but unlike the city crowds, these two were classified as individual characters on their model sheets. As you can see here, I'm showing them on screen. Within the episode, we can see them as SpongeBob continues chasing Plankton, and because they look so similar to the city crowd incidentals, I can imagine this being kind of confusing. So let's do one more quick rundown, because even when I was researching for this, I had to figure out the difference between all of these characters. But to make it simple, these city crowd incidentals, which include City Crowd 1, 2, and 3, I'm showing their model sheets on screen, are groups of fish treated like single background models, while Incidental 114 and Incidental 115 are separate separate individual background characters designed to blend in with those crowds. What's funny is that Incidental 115 ended up becoming way more useful than you'd expect. Like, even though she was created just to be like a background character of Downtown Bikini Bottom, she's since appeared many times within the show in many different roles. For example, she's a teacher in SpongeBob Tentacle Pants, and even a flight attendant in Wary Gary and Plain to See. So she definitely moved beyond her original purpose. But okay, let's move on from the incidentals, because holy shit was that so confusing, guys. But it's kind of necessary, because as I've said before, my goal is to cover every season 1 episode, and I want you guys to be able to see the evolution of the incidentals, right? Like, we've gotten to cover every single debut of an incidental character so far, so I had to dive into these extremely confusing crowd incidental variants. But yeah, moving on. Another thing you may notice if you look at early production art for this episode, especially all of those model sheets I've already shown you today, you'll see that this episode was constantly referred to as My Fair Plankton. And I mean, surprise, surprise, that's because it was the original title for the episode. The name is actually a reference to the Broadway musical in 1964 film My Fair Lady, which actually fits the episode pretty well once you think about it. I mean, My Fair Lady is literally about trying to change somebody and teach them a different way to behave. And in this episode, SpongeBob is basically trying to teach Plankton how to understand friendship and fun and act like a normal dude. So I see what the production team was going for, but I think fun ended up just being a better name. Now, after Plankton gets caught and everybody laughs at him, SpongeBob actually starts to feel bad for the dude, which of course is SpongeBob just being SpongeBob. So he decides that the solution is to befriend Plankton and invite him to hang out. At first, Plankton just slams the door in his face, but Karen eventually steps in and encourages him to use SpongeBob's kindness to his advantage. And this is actually a really important moment, especially for Karen, because it's one of the first times that she started feeling like her own character, instead of just being Plankton's computer. I mean, if we go back to her debut, Plankton, she was basically just a waterproof computer system with a text-to-speech voice, and she didn't really have a personality yet. I mean, she wasn't even referred to as Plankton's wife in that episode. However, in Fun, we start seeing the beginning of the Karen and Plankton dynamic that would become much more familiar later. She usually gives Plankton the idea, and I mean, let's be real, she is the brains behind his operations after this episode. And it all starts with this episode. But to be fair, she wasn't fully there yet here. I mean, in early storyboards, she was still just referred to as a computer. She wasn't even given the name Karen yet, but this episode was definitely a step towards the Karen that we're all familiar with. Plankton's nagging wife, but also the brains of all of his schemes. Okay, now from here, Plankton pretends to go along with SpongeBob's friendship, and this leads to one of the most iconic parts of this entire episode. And I mean, you guys should already know, if you know Ball, it's the Fun song. If you grew up with early SpongeBob, especially as a crusty old millennial like me, then you know how iconic this scene really was. Back in the day when I would go to school, kids would literally sing this song. It was a very big deal. And fortunately for all of us nerds, some early sketches and storyboard images for this scene have surfaced over the years. And if you line them up with the final animation, you can see how closely some of the poses and staging carried over. So shout out to the SpongeBob wiki for archiving these. That's where I got them from. But yeah, this song became so memorable that it was even referenced in later episodes too. For example, in the episode Chums, at the very start of it, SpongeBob can be heard singing the Fun song as he cleans the Krusty Krab.
F is for friends who do stop together. U is for you and me.
Alright, we're almost done with this episode, but I've got like 3 more things that I'd like to cover. And the first was somewhat of a deleted scene. Now, during the scenes where SpongeBob tries to show Plankton different fun activities, there's also a darker cut joke involving jellyfishing. Now, in the final cut of the episode, SpongeBob introduces Plankton to jellyfishing, and Plankton immediately asks about eating them.
So, I get the big net, and you get the little net.
What happens after we eat them?
You don't eat them, you catch them like this.
This already fits Plankton pretty well because he is not interested in the hobby part of it, and he just wants to see what he can get out of jellyfishing. But if we go back to the storyboard version, the joke was originally even darker. Like, instead of asking about eating the jellyfish, Plankton was going to ask about shooting them, as you can see right here in this shot. I think it's pretty obvious why it got changed, considering it's a joke about a gun, and Nickelodeon definitely was not going to let a joke like that fly. I will say though, kudos to like the production team, because I feel like Plankton saying or asking about eating them was, like I said, very fitting to his character. It was a good replacement. Now, if we jump ahead a little bit in this episode, by the end, SpongeBob learns that Plankton was only pretending to be his friend so that he could steal a Krabby Patty again. And this eventually leads to Plankton almost getting eaten by Bubble Bass, which is actually pretty notable because Bubble Bass returning at all was pretty unusual for season 1. Back during the Steven Hillenburg era, most minor characters in early SpongeBob were treated like one-offs, so bringing Bubble Bass back after Pickles implies that the writers may have been considering him as a semi-reoccurring character. But this was eventually scrapped because we do not see him again for a very long time after this episode. These days, Bubble Bass shows up way more often and even gets full episodes centered around him. So it may seem like a normal thing in modern SpongeBob, but in the early seasons, this was not normal at all. So it's very cool to see Bubble Bass pop up again. Another situation that's very similar to this is Flats the Flounder, who was introduced earlier, but then later popped up again in the episode The Bully. Okay, and one more thing, all right? And that's that we need to talk about the Chum Bucket's location in this episode, because Fun actually started one of the show's longest running location inconsistencies. Now in Fun, the Chum Bucket is shown directly across the street from the Krusty Krab, and this would become the general idea for the rest of the series, like canonically, they're across the street from one another. But here's the problem, in a lot of later episodes, the Chum Bucket is just missing from shots where it should clearly be visible. And honestly, this inconsistency has happened over and over again throughout the years. But yeah, Fun is really where the across the street layout became established for the Krusty Krab and Chum Bucket. Now, the episode Boating School does not have a ton of like hidden production trivia, especially compared to other season 1 episodes, but it does have some very important details. And I mean, the biggest reason that this episode matters is that it introduced Mrs. Puff and her boating school, one of the most important supporting characters throughout the entire series. Now, what makes her debut even more interesting is that Mrs. Puff was not just created because the writers randomly wanted SpongeBob to have a teacher. Her creation was actually tied to Nickelodeon's early concerns about the show. After Steven Hillenburg pitched the pilot episode, Nickelodeon executives did not immediately greenlight the series exactly as he presented it. And one of the biggest changes they wanted was for SpongeBob to be a child who went to school, with every episode focusing on his school life. And I mean, that would have made the series completely different from what it became. Well, Hillenburg did not want to turn SpongeBob into that kind of show. So Mrs. Puff and her boating school became the compromise, as SpongeBob could technically attend a school, which technically gave Nickelodeon what they asked for. But at the same time, the series did not have to become completely centered around classrooms or homework. So yeah, it was a very good compromise. And just saying, I actually found this concept art of Mrs. Puff right here, giving us a look at one of the earliest versions of the character. But what's even crazier is that SpongeBob being unable to drive was not actually a part of the original plan either. Today, SpongeBob failing his boating test is one of the most familiar running jokes in the entire series. But according to the June 2003 issue of Nickelodeon magazine, Hillenburg had not yet come up with the idea that Mrs. Puff and SpongeBob would be stuck in an endless quest to get him a driver's license. And as a matter of fact, some early development artwork even showed SpongeBob driving a submarine-like vehicle with no trouble at all. The original theme song also shows him driving several different vehicles, which again just proves the point that originally this concept of SpongeBob not being able to drive boats, as seen in this episode Boating School, was not the original plan whatsoever. Moving on though, since Boating School introduced a brand new location in this episode, the art team also had to put a lot of work into designing it properly. And we can see this as this is one of the first episodes where model sheets and reference drawings were made for almost every single shot of this new setting. I mean, Mrs. Puff's boating school was not just a quick background that appeared once and disappeared. It needed to function as a legit location that the series could return to. So all of these different model sheets I'm showing right here were made to make sure that the location had a consistent design. And I imagine it especially helped the animators. Also though, this episode introduced one of the most famous running gags throughout the entire show, and that's Fred yelling, "My leg," after a crash.
Rev up those fryers, cause I am sure hungry for one. Help! Help!
My leg! Can't you see we're closed?
Now, Fred had appeared before this as a regular incidental character, and he'd continue to be more of a background character for many years after this, but this episode is where his signature catchphrase really begins. It's the first time he ever does it.
Oh, SpongeBob! Why?
My leg!
This gag became one of those SpongeBob jokes that could show up almost anywhere. And I guarantee you, if you go like outside right now and you just go in a group of people and you yell it like that, someone will laugh and know what you're referencing. But yeah, it's cool to see where it originally came from. And it's crazy to think that this one gag eventually led to an entire episode about Fred and him breaking his leg. But as you guys know, I love to talk about locations in SpongeBob and how they change episode to episode. So let's talk about that, as this episode also adds a few details to SpongeBob's pineapple home. One of the smaller but still noticeable additions is the first appearance of SpongeBob's library. The show had already shown different parts of his home before, but this episode expands on the interior a little bit more, a location that even appears in some video games and media outside of the actual show, for example in Battle for Bikini Bottom. As for background characters, Boating School did not introduce nearly as many incidentals as episodes like Pickles or Ripped Pants. I've covered those episodes in the past, and as you guys know, they introduced a ton of characters. But Boating School still did add a couple of new faces to Bikini Bottom, but I will admit they're not the most memorable and they're kind of underwhelming, but incidentals 25, 26, and 50 all made their debuts here. Like I said, they're not the most iconic background characters in the series, and honestly, most fans probably don't even recognize them. But this is an example of season 1 constantly building up the population of Bikini Bottom. But also, there's a weird inconsistency with Mrs. Puff's voice throughout this episode, which does make sense considering this is like literally her first appearance ever. But at one point, she inflates in this episode, as you can see in this clip right here.
Oh, SpongeBob, why?
Mrs. Puff, I think I cheated.
As you just heard, after Mrs. Puff inflates, she briefly speaks with a deep voice. But what's really weird is later in the episode, when paramedics put her into this ambulance, she speaks with her normal voice, even though she's still puffed up.
Okay, boys, take me away.
The show would keep being inconsistent about this detail for a while. For example, in Sandy's Rocket, Mrs. Puff speaks with a deep voice the entire time that she's inflated. But if we jump over to the episode Pranks-a-Lot, she uses her regular voice even though she's puffed up. Again, as I've said about many other details discussed today, this was most likely just the production team not fully deciding how they want her voice to sound, not fully knowing how they wanted to handle Mrs. Puff's voice. But eventually, by later seasons, they got the hang of it. Now, like a lot of classic season 1 episodes, Boating School also found its way into merchandise and marketing. For example, there's a Lego set called Mrs. Puff's Boating School, which is set number 4982, I believe. At first, I thought maybe it was just a general Mrs. Puff set, but the biggest giveaway is the antenna on SpongeBob's head, which references the part of the episode where SpongeBob and Patrick communicate during the boating exam. So yeah, lots of cool stuff in this episode, guys, and stay tuned as I'm gonna keep on covering season 1. The episode Pickles is mostly remembered for Bubble Bass tricking SpongeBob into thinking he forgot the pickles on a Krabby Patty. What a loser, am I right? Like, he makes SpongeBob cry in this episode. But yeah, one of the biggest things this episode did for the series was actually expand the background cast. Something that I personally never noticed when I watched this episode as a kid, but if you pay close attention and you look at the production notes, this episode served as the introduction to a large number of incidental characters, with around 13 new ones being added to the show. I'm showing them all on screen right here. What's cool is we even have all of their model sheets, as you can see. Now, you're probably asking why, and the reason so many new incidental characters were introduced in Pickles mainly comes down to the episode's setting. A lot of this episode takes place inside the Krusty Krab, and several scenes require the restaurant to look busy and for the restaurant to have a crowd. The first big example is when Bubble Bass accuses SpongeBob of forgetting those darn pickles. This entire scene works really well because there's an audience watching SpongeBob fail, and Bubble Bass isn't just calling him out privately, he's like embarrassing him and just roasting him in front of all of his loyal customers. And to fill out these scenes, the art team needed to introduce a bunch of new characters. There's another scene that required a bunch of background characters later in the episode as well, when SpongeBob returns to the Krusty Krab and finally confronts Bubble Bass. This scene, as you can see here, also needed a crowd. And I just want to highlight, a lot of these guys aren't just like random incidentals that you never see. A few of these incidental fish introduced in this episode went on to become familiar background characters throughout the entire series, and a lot of them are still used regularly today.
Ghosts!
Oh.
Gross.
But yeah, even though this episode is mainly about SpongeBob and Bubble Bass, if we take a look behind the curtain, right, we can see that there were other important characters in this episode as well. They were just hidden in the background. Season 1's Ripped Pants is one of the earliest SpongeBob episodes that really shows how much bigger Bikini Bottom was becoming. This episode takes place at Goo Lagoon, which means that the episode needed a lot more background characters than the episodes set around SpongeBob's house or the Krusty Krab. And because of that, this episode actually served as the debut of a huge number of incidental characters. Now, we gotta remember that before this, we only knew of like 2 or 3 incidental characters. We knew of Fred in Incidental 3, but this episode expanded on this concept a ton, introducing like 50 plus new incidentals, including Incidental 2, Incidental number 4, and all of them all the way up until Incidental number 49. I'm showing a bunch of their different model sheets on screen right now, and just yeah, it might not seem like a big deal right now because we're in the modern day and we see these characters all the time, but this was the first time that the art team ever drew these characters for an episode. It's crazy to think that there was a time before these characters were even created, as a lot of these background fish are still used to this very day. Some of them even have names and like have full-on episodes about them, which is pretty crazy because many of them were originally just created to fill out a beach crowd. Since Ripped Pants has so many public scenes, especially with SpongeBob embarrassing himself in front of everybody, the art team needed a much bigger cast of random Bikini Bottomites. For example, this scene right here.
You okay, SpongeBob?
I guess so. Except I ripped my pants.
The whole point of this episode is that SpongeBob rips his pants. He realizes that he gets attention for it, and then he just keeps on chasing that same reaction. And this only actually would work in this episode with an actual crowd of different characters watching him. Even with all of those new designs though, the art team still did not have enough unique background fish to avoid repeats completely. And thus, there are a few moments where duplicated characters can be spotted. I mean, it's a very small detail that only a nerd like me would notice, but it is funny considering all of the new characters that were made just for this episode. Moving on though, the actual ripped pants gag from this episode ended up becoming one of the most iconic moments from early SpongeBob. And I can confirm this as a young millennial who grew up during the era when this episode aired on TV. When I'd go to school, this was a massive joke that people would reference.
You know what would go good with that?
No, what?
Ripped pants.
Well, this moment became memorable enough that Fisher-Price eventually made a toy based entirely on this one episode. The toy features SpongeBob with pants that can rip, of course, and the toy also plays the Ripped Pants song. It's interesting because this is a very specific thing to turn into merchandise, but I mean, it just shows how recognizable this episode actually became. And one interesting detail about this toy is that the song from the episode is not actually performed in the same way that it's performed in the actual episode. For one, in the actual episode, the song isn't sung by SpongeBob's voice actor Tom Kenny, and it's instead sung by Peter S. But in the toy version, Tom Kenny sings it for some reason. Nonetheless, it's an interesting piece of SpongeBob history. And here's the commercial. Let's give it a watch.
I need a tailored. I'll take a banana split and some ripped pants.
Speaking of that Ripped Pants song, a fun fact is that the song itself is a very obvious reference to the Beach Boys, which I mean does make sense considering the episode does take place at Goo Lagoon. It's not a perfect match, but the song is very similar to the 1963 Beach Boys song Be True to Your School. And I'd say that this was most likely intentional.
When Big Larry came round just to put him down.
Like I already said, the episode is built around a beach setting with fish surfing in the background, so a Beach Boys style song was like kind of perfect for the episode. Ripped Pants is also the first episode for a few major SpongeBob staples, so let's dive into that, as this episode served as the debut of one of SpongeBob's most signature things, that being his signature laugh.
Did you order 20 cases of ripped pants? Ah!
You know, it's crazy to think that there were a couple of episodes before this where this laugh was not a part of the show yet.
But you haven't haven't got it yet, have ye, bugs?
But yeah, this episode, Ripped Pants, marked the introduction of that famous laugh, which, I mean, come on, would go on to be one of these sounds most associated with the entire series.
They love it.
But on top of that, this episode also served as the debut of the Goo Lagoon location, a spot that would go on to become one of the show's most common locations, appearing in a lot of later episodes whenever the writers needed a public outdoor setting. But back in Ripped Pants, the location was still brand new. The art team had to figure out what a beach in Bikini Bottom would even look like, and there's actually been concept art released for this episode showing how they developed the location. For example, this shot shows the waves in the water. Moving on, there's also a small continuity issue that comes from this episode, and it has to do with SpongeBob's surfing ability. Now, in Ripped Pants, SpongeBob is clearly shown surfing, as you can see in this shot right here. So based on this episode, SpongeBob can surf, or he at least knows what surfing is. Also, during this earlier era of the show, we see SpongeBob do shell surfing many times.
Stop naming moves after me.
Everybody's an idiot except for me.
Well, it's true.
So just to reiterate, the idea of SpongeBob being able to surf has already been in the show for a while. Like, my boy SpongeBob is like a sponge version of Tony Hawk. He can surf and he can skate. But years later, in SpongeBob SquarePants versus the Big One, the writers made a little bit of a mistake, and they treat SpongeBob as if he does not know how to surf. It's not a big deal, but it does create a pretty weird continuity error. And I mean, don't get me wrong, obviously SpongeBob continuity has never been perfect, and the show often cares way more about the joke or the gags than keeping every old detail consistent. But this one just kind of stood out, and I wanted to highlight it. It also shows a point that I make often, that it seems a lot of the later writers of the show, after Steven Hillenburg left the show, were not as educated on SpongeBob lore. But as I've said many times, I mean, the idea of SpongeBob lore is already kind of ridiculous, right? But another reason that this episode is worth talking about is that Tom Kenny, SpongeBob's voice actor, has said that it's one of his favorite SpongeBob episodes. This is how you guys know that I go really hard, because for this we need to use a DVD special feature, the Backstage Pants DVD featurette, where Tom Kenny goes into detail about how he feels about the episode. Rather than me explaining the whole thing, here, take a listen for yourself. Here's the actual clip from the DVD.
I think one of my favorite episodes is Ripped Pants, the one where SpongeBob rips his pants by mistake and gets a laugh out of it, and then overplays his hand by doing it one too many times, and people get bored with it, and he realizes that jokes have a lifespan. And I think that's something that happened to me a lot as a kid, where you would accidentally hit on something that was really funny, and you would just do it over and over and over again. And when people stopped laughing, it was kind of like a slap in the face. It kind of hurt. And then you had to go out and find something else stupid to get attention and laughs from your fellow classmates.
Okay, I have one more thing to cover about this episode, and it's just to show how iconic Ripped Pants has really become, as the episode was even referenced 25 plus years later in SpongeBob and Patrick's Timeline Twist-Up.
Well, you'll definitely remember when I ripped my pants.
You sure you remember it? Because that looks like my dad ripped your pants.
That's odd.
During this time travel special, Patrick's father travels back to this very episode, Ripped Pants, which is a pretty clear nostalgia pull, but this says a lot about the episode. As it's not just me, even Nickelodeon knows how iconic it actually is, even referencing it so many years later, so yeah. The episode Tea at the Tree Dome is one of the most important early SpongeBob episodes, but not because it's packed with a ton of Easter eggs or trivia. I mean, compared to a lot of other season 1 episodes, there really isn't a lot of interesting production or trivia to point out. Still though, the episode has a few really interesting details, and the first one comes from its title card. Now, in the final version that aired, the title card that was used looks like this. It uses blue text over this like acorn themed background, which really fit the episode perfectly since the story is centered around Sandy Cheeks and her tree dome. However, it turns out this was not the original title card made for the episode. Eventually, the SpongeBob community discovered the original title card via a video game, the SpongeBob Super Sponge video game, which actually contained a bunch of old production assets, which is like crazy that fans got their hands on this. And if we do a side-by-side, we can see the differences between the original and the final version. That by itself is already a cool piece of SpongeBob history, but the story of this title card gets even more surprising, as the scrapped version was not just forgotten forever. It was later remade in 16:9, and like 26 years later, it was used for the season 15 episode A Fish Called Sandy. I mean, talk about a full circle moment, right? And honestly, I'm surprised that the art team even remembered this title card, which makes me wonder, maybe the art team makes a ton of them in advance, but who knows? Another cool fact about this episode though revolves around the debut of Sandy Cheeks. And don't worry, it isn't the actual debut, that isn't the fact here, but it's more regarding her relationship with SpongeBob in season 1. Steven Hillenburg once stated in a SpongeBob DVD special featurette that he created Sandy as a strong female character who could be SpongeBob's friend, but never a love interest. That detail matters because it explains why SpongeBob and Sandy's relationship has usually stayed as a friendship throughout the series.
For Sandy Cheeks, I was looking for a strong female character that could be friends with SpongeBob but not a love interest. They really bang around and do karate together, kind of like stunt buddies. And so that gets him into trouble, creates some conflict in the way they challenge each other.
They hang out, they care about each other, they love doing karate together, and they're like homies. But the show does not treat them like a romantic pair. In later episodes, there have been small moments of this, but for the most part, they're just buddies. However, this was not the only direction people considered early on. A fun fact is that Hillenburg was apparently pressured by some of his peers and coworkers to add a hint of romance between SpongeBob and Sandy. This actually almost happened around the time they were preparing to pitch the show. And if you think about it, if the show had leaned into that more, Sandy and SpongeBob's dynamic could have been completely different. But fortunately, Steven Hillenburg eventually decided against it. Instead of turning Sandy into just being SpongeBob's love interest, the show let her stand out as her own character. And I mean, this was a really good decision, as Sandy would go on to be a very popular character on her own, even getting her own movie. Let's keep it moving though. As a lot of you already know, Tea at the Tree Dome is clearly supposed to be SpongeBob and Sandy's first meeting in the original series.
So, what do y'all call yourself? I'm SpongeBob!
SpongeBob very clearly does not know who Sandy is in this episode, and Sandy very clearly has no idea who SpongeBob is as well. And the episode's entire plot is built around them finally getting to know each other and be introduced to one another. But years later, the spin-off Camp Coral created a pretty major continuity issue by showing SpongeBob and Sandy meeting as children at summer camp, which obviously clashes with Tea at the Tree Dome, because if they already met when they were younger in the prequel show, then this episode of them meeting in the actual regular show cannot actually happen, right? And don't worry, just saying, I'm not about to ramble on about what you guys think I'm about to ramble on about. I've talked about this topic a couple of times before, but I actually found a new Easter egg relating to this, as the franchise eventually found another way to acknowledge the inconsistency. As you guys know, there's an episode in Camp Coral where at the end, prequel Sandy and regular main series Sandy have a conversation, and they kind of fix the whole mess up. But also, in the Camp Coral series finale, the episode End of Summer Days, there's another Easter egg here, as when everybody's heading home from camp, thus ending the prequel and setting things up for the original SpongeBob series, there's a moment where Sandy says the following.
Hey, Sandy, want to sit with us on the bus?
Thanks for the invite, SpongeBob. But future Sandy says I should take the express train back home. For the good of the timeline. See you for tea at the Tree Dome!
What did any of that mean?
As you just heard, Sandy explained that she cannot board the bus due to her needing to preserve the timeline. And then she follows up by saying, "See you for tea at the Tree Dome." If you couldn't already tell, this line is a direct reference to this episode, and it was basically the show's way of pointing back to Sandy's original introduction. I really like this one just because it was the writers being conscious of SpongeBob canon and lore, which already sounds kind of ridiculous, right? Like SpongeBob canon, but it is a thing. And if you're gonna do a show with multiple spin-offs and multiple seasons, there does need to be a bit of a canon to follow here. One more thing though, as the last major thing I want to mention about this episode is one of its most memorable scenes. When SpongeBob enters Sandy's tree dome, he starts drying out because he is a sea creature and the tree dome is filled with air.
You know, you're the first sea critter to ever visit.
I can't imagine why.
Can I get you anything?
Water would be nice.
Our boy can barely breathe, but instead of admitting something is wrong, he keeps trying to act normal because he wants to impress Sandy. His body becomes shriveled, and the whole scene is honestly one of the most iconic jokes from this episode.
I don't need it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it.
Well, that dehydrated version of SpongeBob, and that entire scene in general, was featured in the SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom video game, specifically the console version, not the crappy GBA version that's like a completely different game despite having the exact same title. But yeah, the developers did a very good job referencing this episode in the video game, as SpongeBob's dried out appearance and dry voice are both used whenever he enters Sandy's tree dome in the game.
Sandy, your tree dome is leaking!
Them there robots busted up the glass, SpongeBob. I got a treehouse chock full of robots and it's all your fault, so get in there and clean up your mess.
Now, I grew up actually watching SpongeBob on television in the 2000s, and back in the day, I always loved the episode Bubble Stand, but I didn't realize how massive this episode actually became. Now, I'm gonna get into all the trivia, facts, and Easter eggs, but let's talk about the plot for a second so that it all makes sense, as the plot of this episode is basically just SpongeBob setting up a stand outside of his house and charging people 25 cents to blow bubbles.
Hey, Squidward, wanna blow some bubbles? Only 25 cents.
All right, like I would spend a moment of my time blowing bubbles.
Uh-huh.
Squidward, of course, is immediately annoyed by the entire thing, since he's just trying to relax at home, and SpongeBob is outside loudly advertising bubble lessons. But the episode eventually reveals that Squidward himself doesn't actually know how to blow a bubble. And this leads into one of the most famous scenes from the episode, where SpongeBob demonstrates his iconic bubble blowing technique.
First go like this. Spin around, stop. Double take 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Then pelvic thrust. Woo!
You've probably seen it in memes, but if you didn't know the origins, this is where that iconic bring it around town dance comes from. And this scene is honestly one of the main reasons why bubble stands stuck around for so long, even in SpongeBob's marketing. As a really interesting fact here is that compared to almost any other episode in seasons 1, 2, or 3, this specific episode has been used in a surprising amount of commercials, especially the bubble blowing scene. For example, a clip of the episode was used in a 2001 Burger King commercial promoting these SpongeBob toys, which I imagine are pretty rare now, just like all of the Pokemon ones they did and those Dragon Ball Z ones. See, I know ball because I'm a real millennial. But yeah, this commercial even references the episode. Here, take a look.
It's all in the technique.
We're not just blowing bubbles, we're making bubble art.
Will you look what the tide dragged in?
That same scene also showed up in other advertisements over the years. For example, a clip of SpongeBob's Bring It Around Town moment was also used in a Nickelodeon fruit snacks commercial, which was probably really nice for Nickelodeon because they own SpongeBob and didn't have to pay for any rights. But yeah, here's the commercial.
Bring it around town.
Man, if you grew up in the 2000s, you guys know that fruit snacks and little gummies like these, like those Scooby Snacks gummies, and all of the other ones were like a major part of lunchtime at school. You guys know what I'm talking about? I remember trading those for other snacks. Another big thing from my childhood was breakfast cereal, and in 2017, Honey Nut Cheerios did a commercial that actually features elements of this episode. What's crazy is that commercial's from 2017, so even years later, after all of the other SpongeBob episodes we had, companies still want to pull from this episode Bubble Stand. This bubble blowing scene also made its way into SpongeBob video games, of course. For example, in the Game Boy Advance version of Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, SpongeBob's Bring It Around Town dance is used as a celebration animation when he completes a tile puzzle. This was like perfect, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of just perfect to use that as a victory dance in a game, so shout out to the developers. Also though, if we take a look at the game Legend of the Lost Spatula for the original Game Boy, that Jester also appears as an idle animation, as you can see here. And if we take a look at the box art for the game and we flip it around to the back, look, we can see that there's art of SpongeBob doing the Bring It Around Town motion on the back cover of the game. So hopefully you guys see why I'm rambling on about this now. Like, this one episode has been used in so many other promotional avenues for Nickelodeon. Like, I mean, for a joke from one of the earliest episodes in the season, it ended up having a surprisingly long shelf life across the franchise, right? I'm pretty sure a scene from this episode even appeared appeared in the movie Zephora. It was that board game movie. It was like pretty much a ripoff of Jumanji, if you guys know what I'm talking about. But let's move on because there's other things I want to talk about regarding this episode other than commercials. As this episode actually created a pretty weird lore issue. During SpongeBob's bubble demonstration, SpongeBob blows several different bubble shapes, and one of them is a butterfly, as you can see here. Now at the time, this was just another example of SpongeBob being weirdly talented at making very detailed bubbles. Like, he's actually really good at this. But the problem comes in the next season with the episode Wormy. Back in that iconic episode, another really good one, SpongeBob does not seem to know what a butterfly is. He acts like he's never even seen one before.
What is that thing?
I don't know, Patrick. But whatever it is, it must have eaten Wormy!
Once Wormy transforms into an actual butterfly, SpongeBob and Patrick are like terrified, thinking it's some monster that's gonna eat their heads off. And this creates somewhat of a minor plot hole, because SpongeBob has already interacted with a butterfly-shaped bubble back in Bubble Stand. Like, the dude literally made the bubble, so he must have known what a butterfly was, right? Of course, it's not a huge continuity-breaking issue, since SpongeBob is a cartoon and isn't necessarily known for perfect consistency, but it's still kind of funny. But another detail that's easy to miss in Bubble Stand happens right at the beginning of the episode, as this is actually the first episode where we've seen Squidward playing his clarinet.
And now for some soothing sounds from Squidward's clarinet. Thank you, thank you.
He plays it while SpongeBob is outside building the stand, and looking back, it was actually like a pretty big deal. I mean, Squidward's clarinet would go on to become one of the most important parts of his character. It's just like Sandy being obsessed with technology, or Mr. Krabs being obsessed with scamming everybody since he loves money so much. Like, Mr. Krabs loves money so much that I wouldn't be surprised if he's the one running all of those AI SpongeBob channels, guys. You know, like Cartoonology, it's probably Mr. Krabs running that up over there. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight this, as again, the clarinet is such a massive part of Squidward's personality, and it's cool to see the first time he ever played one. But I'm still not done yet, as there's also some really interesting behind the scene details about this episode that were revealed via Steven Hillenburg's pitch Bible. Over the years, fans have gotten production information from different sources, but this pitch Bible is especially important because it shows how early versions of the show were actually being planned. For example, in the case of Bubble Stand, the pitch Bible revealed that the episode was originally going to be titled just Bubbles, so a much simpler title. This pitch Bible also revealed a change involving one of SpongeBob's bubble creations earlier in the episode. In the final cut, like the version that aired on TV that me and you watched as little kids, one of SpongeBob's bubbles floats into Squidward's house, and it's in the shape of an elephant, as you can see here. But it was revealed in the pitch Bible that this bubble was actually going to be a tugboat instead. Another one of the creations that SpongeBob makes in the episode, for the record. Is it a big deal? No, but it's a detail that only somebody as nerdy and dorky as me would care about. And now if you're ever chilling with the homies and you're watching this episode, you can be like, actually, this episode was going to be titled Bubbles. I'm sure that's how I sound when I make these videos, but yeah. There is one more thing I'd like to talk about, as this episode's legacy has continued much later in the series as well, as Bubble Stand was actually referenced 25 years later in the episode Friendiversary, during a quick scene where Squidward is trying to restore SpongeBob's memories. So yeah, it wasn't just the 2000s. It wasn't even just in 2017 with the Honey Nut Cheerios commercial. Even in recent seasons, this episode still gets referenced. So it's just a testament to how iconic Bubble Stand actually is. The episode Naughty Nautical Neighbors is another pretty important early SpongeBob episode, especially because it expands the neighborhood in ways the series would keep on using for years to come. But before we get into all the locations, which is something I love to nerd out about when it comes to SpongeBob, but before we get into that, one interesting behind the scenes detail about this episode is that it originally had a completely different name. Instead of Naughty Nautical Neighbors, it was originally called Friendly Fire. And we know this because that earlier title has been revealed through behind the scenes production art released over the years. For example, if we look at any of the model sheets from this episode, we can see that it uses that old title, Friendly Fire, which I personally think was a better like name for this episode, as it makes sense for the story since the whole plot begins with Squidward tricking SpongeBob and Patrick into fighting with each other. But yeah, since this episode was still very early in the show's run, it also served as the first appearance of several important background locations. Most notably, this was the first episode to show the backyard areas of SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick's house, or I guess Patrick's rock. And hey, these designs have stayed mostly consistent since their debut, which is really cool because it's not very common with SpongeBob. However, I will admit SpongeBob's backyard does have some weird inconsistencies over time. For example, in this episode, SpongeBob's backyard clearly includes a garage, which is a detail that should be a part of the layout. However, in some later episodes, it's completely left out. For example, in certain shots during the episode, Something Narwhal This Way Comes, the garage is just missing, and even the windows are gone. The same thing happens in the episode I Had an Accident, specifically during the scene where Sandy and Patrick try to bring SpongeBob this delicious looking cake. As you can see, the backyard is supposed to be the same location, but that garage is just missing, and I highly doubt that SpongeBob paid for renovations to get the garage removed from his house. To be fair though, more often than not, especially in modern SpongeBob, the art team does get the backyard right. In fact, it really looks like the crew may have used this exact shot from Naughty Nautical Neighbors as a reference shot in future seasons. For example, if we take a look at the episode Swimming Fools, and we do a side-by-side of the shots of SpongeBob's backyard from that episode and Naughty Nautical Neighbors, it's almost perfect. I mean, look at how similar they are. The only difference is that all of the fences are missing, but I mean, it's not that big of a deal, it's close enough. Moving on though, this episode also expands Squidward's house in a major way, as before this, we had seen Squidward's bedroom, and only that, but this episode gives us the first look at his living room and bathroom. These areas of Squidward's house were created specifically for this episode since the plot needed SpongeBob and Patrick to spend a lot of time inside Squidward's house, since they were both trying to make him their new best friend.
Well, how about some soda, guys?
Yes, please. Thanks, friend.
How about some for your best friend?
Thanks, best friend.
Since so much of this episode happens there, the art team had to build out more of Squidward's home instead of only showing the outside or his bedroom. And what's cool is, just like the backyards, these rooms have stayed pretty consistent over the years. If we take a shot of Squidward's living room from this episode and compare it with any shot of his living room from a future episode, we can see they're pretty much the same. For example, here's a side-by-side between a shot of it from Enchanted Tiki Dreams and then this episode, Naughty Nautical Neighbors. And you guys see what I mean here. Now, even though some of the locations became more defined in this episode, I guess you could say, with the introduction of some locations, SpongeBob's bedroom does have a strange one-off difference. It's very hard to notice unless you do a side-by-side, but the inside of his room looks slightly different from how it appears in other season 1 episodes. For one, the wallpaper is much darker, and I'm circling it, but there is no visible furniture near the window, like there normally is in other shots of his bedroom in other season 1 episodes. But moving on, years later, Naughty Nautical Neighbors was referenced again through a small Easter egg in the episode Friendiversary, as during this scene right here, exact frames from this episode are used. And just to prove it, here's a side-by-side. So even in the modern day, this episode gets referenced. Sandy's Rocket is a really interesting season 1 episode because on the surface, it's mostly remembered as a SpongeBob and Patrick story, right? I mean, the main plot is about them sneaking into Sandy's Rocket, accidentally launching themselves, and then kidnapping everyone around Bikini Bottom like they're psychos since they think they're aliens. But before the episode focuses so much on SpongeBob and Patrick, there was a very important moment earlier in this episode, as it gave Sandy a really important piece of characterization. In this episode, Sandy builds a fully functional rocket ship and plans to use it for space research, which is a pretty big detail as this was the first episode that really showed Sandy's interest in science.
This isn't for fun. See this? This is science. I don't have time for fun and games, and I don't have time for stowaways.
Later in the series, especially after the first 2004 SpongeBob movie, Sandy being a scientist or really smart would become one of her main characteristic traits, with her being shown building machines and inventing all kinds of crazy technology. But Sandy's Rocket is actually the earliest example of that side of her character. Before this, Sandy was mostly defined by being this tough Texan character who was really freaking good at karate.
Well, SpongeBob, take a gander at this.
But this episode added another layer to her, and honestly set up one of her most important traits as a character in my opinion. I'm gonna move on to other Easter eggs, don't worry, and other facts, but I mean, really think about it. There are so many SpongeBob episodes that are very dependent on this trait of Sandy. Moving on though, SpongeBob and Patrick end up messing with Sandy's rocket and launch it into space. And during the rocket's takeoff, there's a quick little gag where Patrick is seen playing a video game on one of the screens inside the rocket. He's having a good old time.
This is Sandy's big rocket, not some kind of fun house.
Now, it's a very small moment, but if you listen closely, the sound effects that play during the scene are extremely similar to the Game Boy version of Tetris. For example, take a listen for yourself.
This is Sandy's big rocket, not some kind of fun house.
This is a really cool detail, and it's interesting as at this time when this episode was in production in the very late 90s, Tetris was like a massive game at the time. I'm pretty sure it was actually like the best-selling Game Boy game of all time at the time. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people who were like developing and producing this episode were playing Tetris on the Game Boy at the time when making the episode. But who knows, that's just a theory. But this episode kept on sneaking in references as it went on. For example, moments after takeoff, there's a really fun scene where SpongeBob and Patrick become weightless due to gravity. And there's actually an Easter egg here, so let's roll the clip and let's see if you guys can spot it.
Hey, we stopped falling!
Look, we're in space now.
There's a book that floats by with 2001 written on its cover, this book right here. And if you're a younger dude, you probably won't get it, but this is actually a reference to the 1968 film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Honestly, one of the most famous science fiction movies ever made. It's a very fitting reference considering this entire episode is about space and going to space, so yeah, it was a fun reference. But after the rocket returns to Bikini Bottom, the episode shifts a little bit. SpongeBob and Patrick believe that they have landed on the moon, even though they are actually right back where they started, in Bikini Bottom.
It sure looks a lot like home.
Can't you see this is all a trick? The aliens are projecting our memories onto the environment. You're trying to confuse us, Patrick.
I love you, SpongeBob and Patrick, but you guys are bozo sometimes. Like, could you not tell that you were in Bikini Bottom? Like, you can literally see your house in some shots, SpongeBob. But because of their mix-up, they start assuming that because they're on the moon, that everybody they're seeing in town is actually an alien pretending to be a normal Bikini Bottom resident. So this leads to them capturing a bunch of familiar-looking fish. And this is where a pretty underrated character detail comes in. Now, who remembers the character Flats the Flounder?
Hi, SpongeBob. I'm gonna kick your butt.
A lot of people mistakenly think that this character first appeared back in the episode The Bully, since that is his most famous episode, and it's very nostalgic for a lot of fans.
Dad, what are you doing?
Nothing, son.
What did I tell you about talking to strangers?
Now he's gonna kick my butt.
Well, it turns out that Flats the Flounder's actual first appearance was in Sandy's rocket, something that I completely missed as a kid. And it's because it's during a very quick shot, as he shows up during the sequence where SpongeBob and Patrick do a montage of rounding up different Bikini Bottomites and trapping them. So yeah, a fun fact here that Flats the Flounder actually debuted in this episode. And again, it's something that I feel like a lot of fans don't realize. Moving on though, to capture everyone, SpongeBob and Patrick use these net guns right here. And you'd think that they just stay in this episode, but they actually were featured outside of the actual TV show. And here's why. When developers make SpongeBob video games or any licensed video game, they're usually given art assets and reference material from the show so that the games can pull from actual episodes. And a fun example of this is that the net guns from this episode, Sandy's Rocket, were later used in two different SpongeBob video games, Legend of the Lost Spatula and Operation Krabby Patty. And the reason this is interesting is that this is a very specific reference. I mean, the net guns are not some like reoccurring SpongeBob item or object. They're like literally only tied to this episode, so seeing them represented in other forms of SpongeBob media is cool and it's world building. You know what I mean? If we see something in one episode, it could appear in another form of SpongeBob media. For example, those boots that Sandy made in the episode Stuck on the Roof, we talked about it before, but those were a random item exclusive to that episode, but they were eventually used in a video game, so cool stuff. Let's get back to the plot though, as just before SpongeBob and Patrick capture Squidward, they analyze him because they think he is an alien. But more importantly, this scene and section of the episode includes a few clear nods to the 1979 film Alien. The most obvious one happens when Squidward tentacles attaches to Patrick's helmet.
Pardon my French, but get this thing off me!
For those of you who don't know, this is actually a direct reference to the facehuggers who were featured in the Alien franchise. Now, this joke works because Squidward is not doing anything alien at all. He's just being typical old Squidward. And I mean, what better episode to include a reference to the Alien movies than an episode where SpongeBob and Patrick think that everybody are literally aliens? Which again, they are so dumb for falling for this. I'd expect this from Patrick, but not from SpongeBob. There's also another reference to the Alien films in this scene, and it has to do with Squidward's water bottle, as the way that SpongeBob's hands appear under the light inside the bottle looks really similar to how the eggs appeared in the Alien movies. Also though, respect to the writers and the art team for including like a reference to a dark sci-fi horror movie within a kid's show. But yeah, there's another reference in this episode, so let's keep it moving, guys. There's a lot of them in this one episode. Now, as we mentioned, SpongeBob and Patrick briefly go to space during the first half of this episode, but by the end of the episode, SpongeBob goes to space again. And there's this really cool shot where SpongeBob looks out of the window towards the moon, and we get this view of Earth. Now, you need to be a total nerd to even catch something like this, and to be honest with you, I didn't even notice it. I had to use like Wikipedia to learn. But this shot from the episode looks almost identical to the famous Earthrise photograph. This photo was taken by astronaut William Anders on December 24th, 1968, during the Apollo 8 mission, where they went to the moon. And honestly, it's become one of the most iconic images ever captured from space, so it makes sense that they'd reference it in this episode. As you just seen, there are a ton of really cool references in this episode, but let's head over to another episode with even crazier Easter eggs, facts, and trivia. Also, real quick, if you're new to the channel, guys, please subscribe. I'm one of the few SpongeBob YouTubers that uses absolutely no AI in my content, and I put a ton of love into these videos. So yeah, please subscribe, guys, especially if you want content from somebody who actually loves SpongeBob just as much as you do. Us goofy goobers gotta stick together, you know what I'm talking about? But yeah, let's head over to another episode. Okay, so there's a topic I really want to talk about here that I've kind of gone over in the past, but let's really deep dive into it. And it has to do with a SpongeBob video game. As believe it or not, one of the strangest pieces of SpongeBob Season 1 history does not come from an episode. It comes from the 2001 PlayStation game, SpongeBob SquarePants Super Sponge. Now, on the surface, this is just an early licensed SpongeBob platformer. Behind the scenes, it accidentally became one of the most important sources of early SpongeBob production material. And that's because when the files for this game, more specifically the development archives, made their way online, these files contained the game's source code, art assets, audio, and more importantly, specific assets from the actual show itself, including backgrounds and scripts. And this is where things get interesting, as on November 14th, 2016, the original scripts for every single Season 1 SpongeBob episode were publicly leaked after being found on one of these Super Sponge asset discs. And they're just text, so it might not be the most visually entertaining thing, but these are all, guys, like the original scripts for that first season. Something that the SpongeBob community never had access to until they got leaked from this game, which is a really crazy story if you think about it. Like I've talked about in the past, the developers of this game needed access to show materials to make sure that the game accurately represented the show that we all watched as a kid. And because of that, parts of the actual Season 1 production pipeline were leaked, which is insane. Now, I grew up actually watching SpongeBob on television in the 2000s, and back in the day, I always loved the episode Bubble Stand, but I didn't realize how massive this episode actually became. Now, I'm gonna get into all the trivia, facts, and Easter eggs, but let's talk about the plot for a second so that it all makes sense, as the plot of this episode is basically just SpongeBob setting up a stand outside of his house and charging people 25 cents to blow bubbles.
Hey, Squidward, wanna blow some bubbles? Only 25 cents.
All right, like I would spend a moment of my time blowing bubbles.
Uh-huh.
Squidward, of course, is immediately annoyed by the entire thing, since he's just trying to relax at home, and SpongeBob is outside loudly advertising bubble lessons. But the episode eventually reveals that Squidward himself doesn't actually know how to blow a bubble. And this leads into one of the most famous scenes from the episode, where SpongeBob demonstrates his iconic bubble blowing technique.
First go like this. Spin around, stop. Double take 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Then pelvic thrust. Woo!
You've probably seen it in memes, but if you didn't know the origins, this is where that iconic bring it around town dance comes from. And this scene is honestly one of the main reasons why bubble stands stuck around for so long, even in SpongeBob's marketing. As a really interesting fact here is that compared to almost any other episode in seasons 1, 2, or 3, this specific episode has been used in a surprising amount of commercials, especially the bubble blowing scene. For example, a clip of the episode was used in a 2001 Burger King commercial promoting these SpongeBob toys, which I imagine are pretty rare now, just like all of the Pokemon ones they did and those Dragon Ball Z ones. See, I know ball because I'm a real millennial. But yeah, this commercial even references the episode. Here, take a look.
It's all in the technique.
We're not just blowing bubbles, we're making bubble art.
Will you look what the tide dragged in?
That same scene also showed up in other advertisements over the years. For example, a clip of SpongeBob's Bring It Around Town moment was also used in a Nickelodeon fruit snacks commercial, which was probably really nice for Nickelodeon because they own SpongeBob and didn't have to pay for any rights. But yeah, here's the commercial. Man, if you grew up in the 2000s, you guys know that fruit snacks and little gummies like these, like those Scooby Snacks gummies, and all of the other ones were like a major part of lunchtime at school. You guys know what I'm talking about? I remember trading those for other snacks. Another big thing from my childhood was breakfast cereal, and in 2017, Honey Nut Cheerios did a commercial that actually features elements of this episode. What's crazy is that commercial's from 2017, so even years later, after all of the other SpongeBob episodes we had, companies still want to pull from this episode bubble stand. This bubble blowing scene also made its way into SpongeBob video games, of course. For example, in the Game Boy Advance version of Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, SpongeBob's Bring It Around Town dance is used as a celebration animation when he completes a tile puzzle. This was like perfect, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of just perfect to use that as a victory dance in a game, so shout out to the developers. Also though, if we take a look at the game Legend of the Lost Spatula for the original Game Boy, that gesture also appears as an idle animation, as you can see here. And if we take a look at the box art for the game and we flip it around to the back, look, we can see that there's art of SpongeBob doing the Bring It Around Town motion on the back cover of the game. So hopefully you guys see why I'm rambling on about this now. Like, this one episode has been used in so many other promotional avenues for Nickelodeon. Like, I mean, for a joke from one of the earliest episodes in the season, it ended up having a surprisingly long shelf life across the franchise, right? I'm pretty sure a scene from this episode even appeared in the movie Zephora. It was that board game movie. It was like pretty much a ripoff of Jumanji, if you guys know what I'm talking about. But let's move on because there's other things I want to talk about regarding this episode other than commercials. As this episode actually created a pretty weird lore issue. During SpongeBob's bubble demonstration, SpongeBob blows several different bubble shapes, and one of them is a butterfly, as you can see here. Now at the time, this was just another example of SpongeBob being weirdly talented at making very detailed bubbles. Like, he's actually really good at this. But the problem comes in the next season with the episode Wormy. Back in that iconic episode, another really good one, SpongeBob does not seem to know what a butterfly is. He acts like he's never even seen one before.
What is that thing?
I don't know, Patrick. But whatever it is, it must have eaten Wormy!
Once Wormy transforms into an actual butterfly, SpongeBob and Patrick are like terrified, thinking it's some monster that's gonna eat their heads off. And this creates somewhat of a minor plot hole, because SpongeBob has already interacted with a butterfly-shaped bubble back in Bubble Stand. Like, the dude literally made the bubble, so he must have known what a butterfly was, right? Of course, it's not a huge continuity-breaking issue, since SpongeBob is a cartoon and isn't necessarily known for perfect consistency, but it's still kind of funny. But another detail that's easy to miss in Bubble Stand happens right at the beginning of the episode, as this is actually the first episode where we've seen Squidward playing his clarinet.
And now for some soothing sounds from Squidward's clarinet. Thank you, thank you.
He plays it while SpongeBob is outside building the stand, and looking back, it was actually like a pretty big deal. I mean, Squidward's clarinet would go on to become one of the most important parts of his character. It's just like Sandy being obsessed with technology, or Mr. Krabs being obsessed with scamming everybody since he loves money so much. Like, Mr. Krabs loves money so much that I wouldn't be surprised if he's the one running all of those AI SpongeBob channels, guys. You know, like Cartoonology, it's probably Mr. Krabs running that up over there. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight this as, again, the clarinet is such a massive part of Squidward's personality, and it's cool to see the first time he ever played one. But I'm still not done yet, as there's also some really interesting behind the scene details about this episode that were revealed via Steven Hillenburg's pitch Bible. Over the years, fans have gotten production information from different sources, but this pitch Bible is especially important because it shows how early versions of the show were actually being planned. For example, in the case of Bubble Stand, the pitch Bible revealed that the episode was originally going to be titled just Bubbles, so a much simpler title. This pitch Bible also revealed a change involving one of SpongeBob's bubble creations earlier in the episode. In the final cut, like the version that aired on TV that me and you watched as little kids, one of SpongeBob's bubbles floats into Squidward's house, and it's in the shape of an elephant, as you can see here. But it was revealed in the pitch Bible that this bubble was actually going to be a tugboat instead. Another one of the creations that SpongeBob makes in the episode, for the record. Is it a big deal? No, but it's a detail that only somebody as nerdy and dorky as me would care about. And now if you're ever chilling with the homies and you're watching this episode, you can be like, actually, this episode was going to be titled Bubbles. I'm sure that's how I sound when I make these videos. But yeah, there is one more thing I'd like to talk about, as this episode's legacy has continued much later in the series as well, as Bubble Stand was actually referenced 25 years later in the episode Friendiversary, during a quick scene where Squidward is trying to restore SpongeBob's memories. So yeah, it wasn't just the 2000s. It wasn't even just in 2017 with the Honey Nut Cheerios commercial. Even in recent seasons, this episode still gets referenced. So it's just a testament to how iconic Bubble Stand actually is. But I'm not done yet. Let's head over to another episode, guys, and I've got more Easter eggs coming up. And real quick, just a heads up to all of my viewers, and you can skip ahead if you don't want to hear me, but hear me out, all right, please. I, for the most part, have been doing sleep content on this channel where I make these really big videos. They're like compilations where the first little bit of it is new content, but I want to branch off from this a little bit. I still want to make sleep content, so don't worry, but I also want to make some videos that are like 30 minutes long and are more focused on one SpongeBob topic. So over the next few months and weeks, if you see me upload one of these videos and you see a video that's 30 or 40 minutes from me, please click on it, guys, because I need your guys' support. Right now, my channel is heavily ingrained in the like sleep content algorithm, and I'm very lucky and very thankful, but if I release these videos and no one clicks them, it can really hurt my channel. So just, yeah, you'll be doing me a massive favor. But yeah, more Easter eggs, let's keep it going. The episode, The Green Tentacle, is quite the new one. It actually isn't even out in America yet, but that's just how hard Cartoon Corey goes for you, and I've already found a bunch of Easter eggs in this episode. But let's get into the plot, that way all of the Easter eggs and facts actually make sense. But yeah, on a sunny day in Bikini Bottom, Sandy is enjoying a refreshing glass of this iced tea right here in her tree dome when a familiar insect flutters by. Longtime fans will recognize this butterfly as it's the very same one that startled SpongeBob back in the series' second episode, Tea at the Tree Dome.
There's no water in here.
Years later, like 25 plus years later in The Green Tentacle, this cute little creature makes a brief cameo here in this episode, making for a really cool nod to the past. And just saying this isn't like a random butterfly, if we do a side-by-side, we can see that the butterfly's distinctive orange wings with these black spots make it very clear that, you know, it's the same butterfly. It's a tiny detail, but a rewarding Easter egg for those of us who are massive SpongeBob nerds, especially of the first season, Withering. Shredding leaves at an alarming rate. This thing is dying. It's cooked. Desperate to save it, she enlists help from SpongeBob and eventually Squidward, who, as we've seen before, fancies himself as a bit of a gardener, which instantly rang a bell for me at least, no pun intended, and I'm sure for a lot of you guys, as it mirrors a scene from the classic episode Fear of a Krabby Patty, where Mr. Krabs frantically pounds on a cowbell in a similar fashion.
Day 23! Give it up for day
6,654.
Day 30!
Now, this homage isn't frame perfect, but the frenzied energy and timing make it that it's a pretty clear inspiration. Also, just saying, Squidward becoming so crazy in this episode is very funny. He reminds me of myself when I forget to take my ADHD medication. Bones and facts and references to older episodes. Then forget about all of that, let's talk about the multiple Easter eggs in this one scene, as many of the leaves are actually fragments of Squidward's past artworks seen in older episodes. And the first one that I think we all will recognize is the infamous bold and brash painting, which can be seen right here. Originally from season 2's Artist Unknown, Bold and Brash is the abstract portrait of Squidward that he once tried to sell to an art collector. This guy right here, Monty P. Moneybags. And I mean, who could forget Monty's scathing critique?
How about this one? I call it bold and brash.
More like belongs in the trash.
Sorry, I must have missed that one.
Don't worry, I'm gonna talk about more Easter eggs in this episode, as there's multiple other portraits here that reference older episodes. But just saying, I'm actually considering doing a full video, like doing a deep dive, like an insane deep dive into Squidward's portraits, because Squidward's actually a really good artist. But anyways, this painting right here, Bold and Brash, appears in the green tentacle, and it's an awesome Easter egg. But it's also a little heartbreaking. I mean, Squidward in his derangement has literally torn up all of his masterpieces to save a tree. So one has to wonder, is Bold and Brash canonically destroyed now? I mean, I really hope not. But actually, Bold and Brash isn't the only piece of artwork that we can see during that shot. As you can see, and I'm circling all of them, there's a bunch of other portraits here. And a couple of them are also references to other portraits we've seen in previous SpongeBob episodes. They're Easter eggs. For example, I was able to spot this one right here, and I just want to say this isn't on the SpongeBob wiki, I found this on my own. But there's this blue background self-portrait of Squidward right here, where he has one normal eye and one like red bloodshot eye, I guess. It's a very funky art style, but if it looks familiar, it's because we've seen this exact same portrait before. Many times actually, but a good example is that it was one of the many paintings Squidward carted into the Krusty Krab during the season 10 episode Out of the Picture. And that episode, Squidward tried to sell a whole gallery of his art, and this blue background portrait was clearly one of his personal favorites on display. Here's a side-by-side, and they're definitely the same painting or portrait, right? The animator's decision to include it here is honestly a deep cut reference, and it shows their attention to detail, because if you really think about it, they could have put like any random painting here. They could have just doodled some random stuff, but they specifically chose established Squidward art. And this has actually been an ongoing thing. I noticed while researching this section that in the modern day, I just hit my microphone, but in the modern day of SpongeBob, right? A lot of Squidward's portraits are consistent. Like when they're referenced, they'll be other portraits we've seen. For example, if we look at all the portraits seen in Out of the Picture, and then we look at the episode Chatterbox Gary, a lot of them line up. But anyways, there's actually another reference in the green tentacle in the form of another portrait during the exact same frame. It's this one right here. And it's an even stranger portrait of Squidward drawn in a surreal art style with like an extra eye on his forehead. He's also cut in half and mirrored on the bottom of the portrait. I'm zooming in on it, it's this one right here. And while this one is also a reference, as if we head back to Out of the Picture, we'll find a very similar portrait right here. They seem to be color variants of each other, but as we can see side by side, it's the same. On top of this, there's another painting back in the green tentacle in that same frame that stands out. It's this like tiki inspired painting of Squidward's face, and this one might trigger memories from a more recent episode, as it's a reference to Chatterbox Gary from season 11, where Gary acquires a collar that translates his meow into speech, which is actually pretty cool. Imagine giving like your dog or your goldfish like some device and they could talk to you. I know my dog would just beg for treats all the time. But yeah, back in that episode Chatterbox Gary, Squidward proudly shows off a secret room in his house filled floor to ceiling with self-portraits. And one of the pieces visible in Squidward's gallery is identical to the one I just mentioned in the green tentacle. The fact that it reappears here is again a fun shout out to Chatterbox Gary and underscores just how vast Squidward's crazy art collection attraction really is. And again, realistically, the storyboard artists could have doodled up some random modern art for this scene, but instead they pulled from Squidward's established catalog. Because this dude has a lineup of paintings, man, he has a lot. But let's keep it going with even more Easter eggs. Ultimately, the crisis in the green tentacle is resolved in a very SpongeBob-esque way. SpongeBob innocently muses that it's a shame that they can't just ask the tree what's wrong. And it's very fitting for Sandy's character if you think about it. Like, look at this truck. It just screams redneck Texan. But Sandy knows the issue now. She fixes it. Wonder if Squidward's paintings, like all of them, are canonically destroyed now. It's a cartoon, so I doubt it. SpongeBob is very selective with their continuity, so who knows. I'm sure the episode The Krusty Bucket has a ton of really cool references, Easter eggs, and bits of trivia, so let's dive into it. I think you guys are really gonna like this one. At the start of this episode, Plankton sneaks into Mr. Krabs' house, hides in a cabinet, and steals one of Mr. Krabs' razors. As a matter of fact, Mr. Krabs even uses Plankton as a razor at one point by mistake. That did not look like a pleasant experience. Just imagine how nasty Mr. Krabs' chest hairs would be. Just like, oh my gosh. Anyways though, the point of all this for Plankton is that he wants to steal some of Mr. Krabs' DNA. But more on that in a moment. For now, let's go back to that washroom. And don't worry, we're not trying to get a peek at Mr. Krabs. We just want to look at this tube of toothpaste right here, as this is actually a direct nod to an earlier episode. This toothpaste brand is called Crust, and we've actually seen it before this, only once though, back in the episode Blackened Sponge. Back in that episode at the very start, SpongeBob is seen brushing his teeth before he falls and smacks his eye. He gets a nasty shiner. But yeah, if we zoom in on that toothpaste in Blackened Sponge, we can see it's also from the Crust brand. So the fact that the art team used this exact same brand, which had only appeared like once before this, was certainly intentional and is the type of Easter egg that I love. I love Easter eggs like this. And just saying this is for sure an Easter egg, it isn't like Kelpos, for example, where it's like a common in-world SpongeBob product that pops up often. For example, Kelpos appear in numerous episodes, whereas Crust has only appeared once before this. So yeah, them including it here was an Easter egg. I don't know why I over-explained that, but I gotta prove my point, you know what I mean, guys? I don't want to ever be just spreading misinformation or making reaches. Also though, a fun fact here that is pretty obvious if you think about it, but the brand name Crust is definitely a spoof on the real-life toothpaste brand Crest. The logos and all that do not look similar, but it's definitely a spoof. Moving on though, as I said, the reason that Plankton wanted this DNA is for one of his new schemes. He takes the hair from the razor and mixes it together with his own DNA to create a combined clone known as Plain Crab. Once created, Plankton sends Plain Crab to the Krusty Krab to steal the formula. And while Plankton waits outside, he gets stepped on by a certain someone. Now, this certain somebody is actually a rare character. It's the character Colonel Carper, who first appeared back in the episode Hello Bikini Bottom. Back in that episode, this character hears SpongeBob and Squidward perform and wants to manage them. But Mr. Krabs takes over after hearing about the money, of course, forcing Carper out. Now, after that first appearance, he disappeared from the show for like 8+ years. He just was not in any other episodes. But then he randomly returned in this episode, The Krusty Bucket, giving us a little reunion. It's cool to see him back. And it's cool to see that the animators and art team, instead of just using a random incidental here, they chose to use a character we hadn't seen for a while. This was certainly intentional. Now, as I said, Plankton was waiting for Plain Crabs to get the secret formula, but instead he turns on everyone. He turns on Plankton and turns on Mr. Krabs and kicks out everybody except for SpongeBob, Squidward, and the customers, and pretty much just takes over the Krusty Krab. So Mr. Krabs and Plankton try to work together, even attempting to jump Plain Crabs at one point. Like, they literally wait in an alley and are about to just jump him with weapons.
Hey, what the fuck?
Dude, Mr. Krabs is wild for that one, and unfortunately it fails. And eventually, Plankton and Mr. Krabs turn on each other, getting into a fight inside the Krusty Krab that leads them into the Krusty Krab bathroom. And this is where we can find another Easter egg. During this section of the episode, Krabs and Plankton fight inside one of the stalls. And the rare character, Administrator Flotsam, can be seen in the stall right next to Plankton and Krabs.
Hey, I am trying to read.
This is another very rare SpongeBob character, and them being in the washroom is actually like a gag with the character. Administrator Float Sam has only appeared in 4 episodes before this, so he is very rare, but whenever he does appear, it's always for some reason in the Krusty Krab washroom. For example, in the episode The Ballad of Filthy Muck, he appears in this scene in the Krusty Krab bathroom, and this also happens in The Return of the Dirty Bubble, in this scene right here. I don't know why the dude is always in the Krusty Krab washroom. I don't know what he's doing in there, but he's in there in this episode, which is a reference to all of his past appearances. And again, this character is very rare, so seeing him pop up again was definitely intentional by the art team. Speaking of that washroom scene with Mr. Krabs and Plankton fighting and them interrupting the administrator's dump, poor guy. Imagine just trying to take a poop and then Mr. Krabs and Plankton are just fighting. But speaking of that scene, there was also a deleted scene planned for this section that got cut. In another stall, there was supposed to be a young boy who was also disturbed by the fighting while doing his business, with multiple objects like an anchor, a stray tire, and even a freaking television comedically being thrown in his stall. This ended up being cut from the final episode. And I mean, if you think about it, it was most likely due to it depicting a child character using the washroom. I mean, the kid is very clearly clothed in the storyboard, and the scene is in comedic taste, but yeah, I can understand why it was cut. But that is pretty much it for the Krusty Bucket, so let's head into another episode. The episode Stuck on the Roof opens with a light-hearted musical gag and turns into a pretty interesting plot where SpongeBob gets stuck on the roof and is too scared to come down. We're gonna get into the Easter eggs, but SpongeBob starts his day at the Krusty Krab by cheerfully dancing while flipping patties. They look really good. I could go for a burger right now. But after goofing around, he finds himself stuck on the roof of the restaurant. From here, SpongeBob realizes that he's just terrified of heights. Like, our dude is just scared shitless of heights and becomes literally stuck on the roof. Now, the episode is packed with a lot of cool visual gags, and the SpongeBob team took the opportunity to slip in a couple of Easter eggs. So let's get into that. The episode's opening scene shows SpongeBob playing a boombox and dancing around the Krusty Krab, literally twerking at one point. Like, our boy is shaking that booty. At one point, SpongeBob really breaks it down. He faces away from the camera and starts wiggling his butt very enthusiastically, in time with the music. Like, our boy actually can dance a little bit, but this particular booty shaking move isn't just random silliness. It's actually a callback and a reference to one of SpongeBob's most iconic dance moments. If you're an old school fan like me, you'll recognize it as a nod to Pizza Delivery, specifically where SpongeBob sings that iconic Krusty Krab pizza song while dancing while walking on this desert road. And Stuck on the Roof, the animators have SpongeBob get sturdy in a very similar fashion, essentially throwing it back in the same way that he did all those years ago. It's a brief shot, but I mean, look at it side by side. You can see the resemblance. It isn't perfect, as I always say, but it's close enough, right? And this scene with SpongeBob throwing it back also features another quick little reference, as at one point, SpongeBob flips a Krabby Patty into the air and serves it to a customer using his backside. It's a quick gag, but it's actually a reference to a joke from the season 7 episode I Heart Dancing. Back in that episode, SpongeBob's love of dance spills over into his fry cook job, and he's shown performing a similar trick. But yeah, it isn't a frame-to-frame recreation, but again, it's close enough. From here, the main plot kicks in, once SpongeBob is actually trapped on the roof. And I mean, SpongeBob has some good friends, so of course they try to rescue him. And if you can think of anyone who would actually be able to get the job done, I mean, come on, it's Sandy Cheeks. And she actually has a new solution. She dons a pair of extendo boots, spring-loaded robotic boots that extend. Now, in the episode, these fail miserably. With this happening, as you can see, Sandy does not help SpongeBob at all. But also just saying, these boots, as cool as they are in the cartoon, actually made their way into a SpongeBob video game. Specifically in the 2021 fighting game, Nickelodeon All-Stars Brawl. It's basically like a Super Smash Bros. Clone, if you guys remember. In this game, Sandy actually has the extendo boots as part of her moveset. So it's cool to see this random deep cut item from like a random SpongeBob episode. Like, Stuck on the Roof is not the most notable SpongeBob episode. It's cool to see something random from this episode used in a video game. But back to the plot, as SpongeBob comes to accept his his new life on the roof, he finds a way to make it work by turning the rooftop into pretty much like a makeshift version of the Krusty Krab. And customers start going up there to eat, thus leaving the restaurant empty. Which, as I mentioned before, Squidward absolutely loves this shit. He can just do whatever he wants in the Krusty Krab right now. So can you really blame him? Squidward literally drags a lounge chair and decorates the cash register boat with some homey touches, putting his Squidward spin on it. And amongst these items, there's actually a reference. We can see right here, this statue is actually the same sculpture from the episode Are You Happy Now?
My art will never be shown in this building. Oh, what the? This is my sculpture. How did it get here?
So somehow Squidward either rebuilt it or had a spare, and now it's serving as an Easter egg right here in this episode. If we look at them side by side, there is some differences this time, but considering it's quite literally the same statue, just with a couple of differences, this was the art team giving us a nice little nod to an older episode. And I love this shit. You guys know I love this stuff. Like, I get way too into this type of stuff, so let's head over to another episode and talk about more nerdy references and SpongeBob trivia. The episode Mall Girl Pearl from season 9 has a bunch of really cool Easter eggs. In this one, Pearl Krabs is determined to snag her first job at the Bikini Bottom Mall, a mission that turns into a chaotic tour of the mall in hidden SpongeBob lore. As Pearl bounces between stores trying to get hired, the background fills up with familiar faces and references for longtime fans. For example, as Pearl passes by Scorched Coral, this store right here, keep an eye out for the Diggery-Doo player from the season 2 episode Something Smells. If you're wondering who the heck I'm talking about, it's this character right here.
Hi, Tambourine Girl. Hi, Timbali Man. Hi, Didgeridoo Player.
It's been like 20 years since we've seen this character. That all changed in Mall Girl Pearl. The character would also pop up in the season 13 episode Sea Urchin and Snail Fail during this scene, making his second appearance in like 20 plus years.
Look at all those people.
I know he seems like a random background SpongeBob character, but he's a very rare character. Heading back over to Mall Girl Pearl, there's other random characters that pop up in the background that we have not seen in a long time. Other rare characters. For example, Carl, the overzealous manager from the episode Selling Out.
Hi, gentlemen, I'm Carl. I'll be your new manager.
New manager?
I think you'll find working at the Krabby-O Mondays to be both a learning experience and an enjoyable one.
Yeah, that guy right there, he's spotted twice at the mall. Once outside the Bangles and Dangles store, and later in the food court right here. Carl's cameos nod to his infamous stint running Krabby-O Mondays in season 4, so it's pretty cool to see him pop up again, even though it's also very random. But there's more. At one point, we see this graffiti door during the fight between Pearl's bullies and the crazy grandmother. As we can see right here, we can see Squidward smells and Krabs is a blank, a direct throwback to this scene from the SpongeBob episode Sailor Mouth.
Squidward smells. Good. Krabs is,
Do you kiss your mother with that mouth?
well, sometimes, but not recently.
Even SpongeBob himself only shows up in a blink and you'll miss it moment. He has just 3 quick cameos, which is kind of crazy that he was making cameos in his own show, but I guess it makes sense. This episode is all about Pearl. And there's more background cameos as well, by the way. If we look over here, we can see Mermaid Man, Barnacle Boy. If we head over to this scene, we can see Bubble Buddy. And if we take a look right here, we can find the health inspector from the iconic episode Nasty Patty.
I'm going to need you to bring me one of everything on the menu.
Excellent choice, my darling. Coming right up.
Whoever wrote this episode definitely knows their SpongeBob lore, because it's really cool to see all of these characters that we have not seen in a long time popping up. Mr. Krabs has quite the misadventure in the episode My Two Krabses from season 12. It all starts with Mr. Krabs sneaking in a tanning session without his shell in his office before a date with Mrs. Puff. It's crazy to think that these two have been like on and off dating since like season 2 or 3, but anyways, eventually SpongeBob walks in to deliver some ice cream, but instead of finding Mr. Krabs, he only finds this.
Mr. Krabs! Are you okay? Speak to me.
We're gonna get into the Easter eggs, don't worry, but you guys need the context of the plot for them to make sense. But from here, SpongeBob literally assumes that Mr. Krabs has melted.
Oh, look at that. And right before his big date tonight. What a shame.
A date? Oh, must love die meltily in my arms too!
In a panic, SpongeBob and Patrick take the empty shell, determined to basically bring Mr. Krabs back to life, Frankenstein style. Meanwhile, the real and shellless Krabs realizes his shell is missing and rushes home to find something or anything to wear, really. And this is where we can find a really cool Easter egg. As he flings open his bedroom closet, and in this frantic scene, the show sneaks in a treasure from Mr. Krabs' past. I'm gonna play the clip and let's see if you guys can spot the Easter egg.
Okay, I knew the spare is in here somewhere. Aha!
Let me explain. So among the tossed outfits is this bright pink flower print cuddly crab uniform, and this is specifically from the episode Bossy Boots, a season 2 episode. Longtime fans will recall that in this episode, Mr. Krabs briefly transformed the Krusty Krab into the cutesy cuddly crab. Well, actually, it was more that Pearl did this. Mr. Krabs was kind of just forced to do it, and as you can see in this clip I'm about to play, they had to wear these exact same outfits.
Only a fool would wear that.
Avast, ye shipmates! Don't these just shiver your timbers?
Seeing this ridiculous attire resurface here, only to be deemed unwearable by Mr. Krabs, is a delightful Easter egg. It confirms that Mr. Krabs hung on to the old uniform, and it adds a layer of irony to his wardrobe scramble. But the closet gag doesn't stop there. Mr. Krabs also tosses out a chicken costume, the same one that SpongeBob once wore in the episode Cephalopod Lodge. Here's a side-by-side, and yeah, I think that that's a reference. And we've got more. Let's head over to another episode. The Patrick Star Show episode, Stair Wars, is a standout episode of the Patrick Star Show that begins innocently enough, then free falls into utter silliness. The premise, Patrick and Grandpat get into a stubborn standoff on the staircase of their house, each refusing to let the other pass.
I'm sorry, Grandpat, but Dad always told me.
Son, the best advice I could ever give you is never back down from a stare-off.
I told you that. That's my advice.
Now it starts out as a minor inconvenience, escalates into an epic, overdramatic war spanning the entire episode, complete with battle montages and war cries, all over a staircase. Well, admit this over-the-top staircase duel, Stair Wars is jam-packed with references both to SpongeBob's wider franchise and to pop culture in general. Early in the episode, as Patrick slides up the impossibly long banister to charge at Grandpat, a train suddenly whooshes through the scene. It's a quick gag. The Star Family home seems to have a full locomotive running through it. But if we pay close attention, there's a marquee that says its destination, that being Camp Coral. For those in the know, this is a delightful nod to Camp Coral, another SpongeBob spin-off that honestly is kind of overhated. Camp Coral's not that bad. This is a fun little bit of self-promotion. But more importantly, what's really cool about this is it connects everything together. SpongeBob has really been trying to expand the universe in the most recent years, where they've introduced these spin-offs and spin-off movies where Plankton has his own movie, Sandy has her own movie, Patrick has his own show, and then there's Camp Coral. So stuff like this shows that the world is connected and that it all comes together, and I love that. Now on top of Easter eggs like that connect the world together, we also have a nostalgic character cameo in this episode. This right here is Mr. Sun, the smiling, alive sun that SpongeBob famously serenaded in the classic Best Day Ever song. He looks like this. He's had many different designs over the years, but what makes this a reference is this design right here, the one that we seen in Best Day Ever. Well, in Stair Wars, Mr. Sun appears with the exact same design, making for a cool reference as we haven't seen this design in years. This was his first appearance in the Patrick Star Show, and indeed a rare appearance in the franchise overall. The episode begins with the Sun waking up groggily at dawn, pouring a cup of coffee from the Star family's kitchen, and perking up for the day. And this is a direct visual reference to Best Day Ever, where the Sun was personified as a part of SpongeBob's morning routine. Our next episode is called The Other Patty. When a shady new restaurant called the Flabby Patty threatens the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob becomes determined to get Mr. Krabs and Plankton to set aside their rivalry and work together.
If you work together, the Flabby Patty recipe would be yours.
Okay, fine. We'll work Yeah, I don't see that working out.
In this episode, SpongeBob poignantly reminds the two feuding restauranteurs of something fans learned in the special episode years in the past, Friend or Foe, with him saying the following line.
There was a time when Plankton and I were best friends. Friends at birth, you might say. Even as wee ones.
Goo.
SpongeBob references that Mr. Krabs and Plankton at one point in time were best friends, holding up an old photograph of Krabs and Plankton during happier times. Well, this is a direct callback to the episode Friend or Foe, which revealed that the two enemies were childhood best friends before becoming like mortal enemies, all over like a smash burger secret formula. Imagine switching up on your homie just over a Krabby Patty secret formula. I don't know, it's crazy, but roll the clip.
Why are you two always fighting? You were best palsy-walsies once. Can't you two make up and be friends?
Yee! Those days are over, SpongeBob.
Krabs and I are bitter enemies.
And that's the way we like it.
By invoking their past friendship, SpongeBob is essentially referencing the events of Friend or Foe within the story, hoping that nostalgia will fix their friendship. It's a neat bit of continuity that rewards viewers who remember the 2007 special. And in the end, as you can imagine, they figure everything out, so it's a good episode. But let's head over to another one with more Easter eggs. Let's talk about the episode Exchange Student Driver, a new one from season 16. When Mrs. Puff enrolls SpongeBob in a faraway driving school exchange program just to get rid of him, can't really blame her, our absorbent hero finds himself in a familiar location, Clopnod, a bizarre town where reckless driving is the norm, so SpongeBob fits right in. The premise flips the usual boating school formula, where SpongeBob's chaotic driving style, which is normally a nightmare in Bikini Bottom, like this guy has nearly killed people before, turns out to be perfect in Clopnod. In fact, he performs so well and is such a standout student that the Clopnodian instructor awards SpongeBob with a driver's license, carved on a turnip, no less. And this is where our first Easter egg, well, I guess this is more of a fact, comes in. And don't worry, just saying, there are a ton of Easter eggs coming up, so stay tuned. This one's just really interesting, and it's actually kind of controversial. As if you go to the comments of the fandom page of this episode, you'll see that there's a lot of people upset at the fact that SpongeBob received his license, and I'll explain why. Creator Steven Hillenburg, the person who created Bikini Bottom, made SpongeBob like the OG of SpongeBob, famously said that SpongeBob should never permanently earn his license. Why? Well, to preserve the comedic tension with Mrs. Puff, which is a big part of many episodes, including this episode, Exchange Student Driver, but also to fulfill Nickelodeon's mandate that the show should revolve around a school setting and a teacher character. For those of you who don't know this, Mrs. Puff was a character that Nickelodeon pretty much demanded. They basically told Steven Hillenburg that if you're going to make a show like this, there needs to be some educational aspect to it, which is why SpongeBob goes to boating school and learns, though if you really think about it, the dude never really progresses. Well, at least he does in this episode, but that's the issue here. However, there's actually a workaround for this. By giving SpongeBob a license only in Clopnod, the episode cleverly skirts Hillenburg's rule without technically breaking it, since SpongeBob still isn't licensed in Bikini Bottom. He got his license in Clopnod, a completely different location. Let me know what you guys think about this one in the comments, but do you think that because it happened in a different location that it makes it okay? But yeah, a fun fact about this episode I wanted to talk about, but let's get into an actual Easter egg here. As throughout this episode, as it progresses and we see SpongeBob at Mrs. Puff's boating school, longtime viewers may catch a classroom callback in this episode. This thing right here is the good noodle board. Mrs. Puff's star chart, or basically like a chart for how she tracks the behavior of her students. It made its first appearance years ago, like 25 years ago, back in the classic episode, one of my favorites, New Student Starfish, where SpongeBob shows Patrick the board and explains its function before class.
Those drinks are recorded here on the good noodle board.
Oh, sorry.
Whoa!
SpongeBob in this episode eventually actually gets in trouble thanks to Patrick and loses one of his stars.
Turning, it is important to signal at least 40 feet from the
Big
turn.
fat meanie, you can't do that. She's the teacher.
What about the teacher? What? As if I really look like this.
Well, it's really cool to see it pop up again in this episode, and it shows that whoever wrote this episode knows their stuff. They're a real SpongeBob fan. As there's been other episodes that have shown Mrs. Puff's class classroom, like the classroom at the boating school, and the good noodle board is not there. So this was intentional. Also, just saying, I don't normally do this, but if this Easter egg sounds familiar, it's because there's a very similar one in another episode that I covered recently, where the good noodle board popped up again. So yeah, just saying, this was a new Easter egg. Moving on though, I've got some more Easter eggs for you guys in the form of character cameos. And of course, all the cameos here are characters that are pretty rare. We're gonna be covering more cameos in other episodes in this video, so stay tuned. But let's get into it. As I mentioned, Mrs. Puff sends SpongeBob on like a boat driving exchange student thing, where he's being sent to Clopnod. And we get this scene where we see the travel there with a map. And there are a bunch of deep cut references on here. And I'm very proud, as they're ones that the SpongeBob fandom wiki hasn't even found yet. For one, just as the boat is approaching no man's land, we'll see right here that these are the trench monsters from the 2004 SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Now you might not see it right away because there's just eyes, but this is specifically a reference to when SpongeBob and Patrick are walking through right here, and as you can see, there's all of these different eyes. Also, they're very clearly like on the map in trenches, so yeah, this is a subtle reference right here, but it's definitely a reference. However, the next two are way more blatant. For example, just passing no man's land, we can see the Cyclops character from the same 2004 SpongeBob movie. This character right here, we can see that his leg or his boot is put down on the no man's land area of the map. Pretty cool. And if you were questioning the last two, here's one that absolutely confirms it. In that 2004 SpongeBob movie, we were introduced to Maximus, this character right here. And what I really want you to pay attention to is the small traffic light at the top of his head acting like a lantern of a glowfish. As if we go back to that same map part, look, Maximus is right here. The colors are slightly off, as you can see in this side by side, but the reason we know for sure is that traffic light on top of his head right here, which basically reaffirms the other two Easter eggs I was mentioning of the trench monsters and of the Cyclops, who also all appeared in that original 2004 SpongeBob SquarePants movie. I imagine that whoever, like the production team around this episode, exchange student driver, one of them probably worked on the movie or something in the past, but who knows. One other thing I want to talk about real quickly, and then we'll head into more Easter eggs in another episode, guys. Stay tuned because I've got some of the coolest Easter eggs coming up. But here's some behind the scenes stuff about this episode. As remember how I said SpongeBob got his license on a turnip? We actually got to see the process of how this came to life, with Shane Richardson, Hannah Hong, George N, and Amy L sharing these drawings online, where we can see the first process of the photo, the second process of the photo, then we can see the shot in the episode where it's blank, and then finally this shot where we can actually see the driver's license text. And fun fact, these were originally painted before being scanned in with the lines drawn digitally. So some really cool stuff right there, but let's head over to another episode. Next up is the episode Squidward's Sick Days from season 13. And in this one, Squidward ends up faking being sick just so he doesn't have to go to work, which is very Squidward. He's a very lazy guy sometimes. Just as you can imagine, this doesn't go as planned, and Mr. Krabs sends a certain somebody to look after Squidward.
Oh, you are in no condition to be alone. That's why I brought you some help. Take one of these and call me in the morning.
The doctor is in.
Now, there's actually quite a few Easter eggs in this episode, but for them to make sense, I gotta give you guys some context. So at the start of this episode, it's Squidward at work, and as you can see, he isn't having a very good time. Everyone's yelling at him, but it turns out that this is a nightmare. However, during the nightmare, he actually makes a certain face that is a reference to an older episode. For example, take a look at this clip right here. This face right here that Squidward makes when he screams is almost identical to this face that he made in the episode Graveyard Shift.
The sash ringing! The flash singing! The bash pinging!
The hash slinging slasher!
Here's a side-by-side, and let me know in the comments. I think that this was a pretty clear reference, or maybe it was just a happy accident. But either way, it's really cool. And if we fast forward a little bit, we'll get to this scene in the episode where Squidward is fantasizing about the perfect day, which includes him diving into a beautiful waterfront, jumping off of a waterfall, and along the way, we see his favorite snack. These right here are bonbons, and this is another reference. This bonbon snack snack first appeared in the episode Good Neighbors during this scene right here. And they're actually one of Squidward's favorite snacks. They're more of like a luxury treat, it seems.
This is gonna be a heavenly day. Oh, I almost forgot. Bonbons. Hello there, heaven's little wonder.
So yeah, it's cool to see them in Squidward's daydream. He really likes bonbons. I wanna try a bonbon right now. But before I can do that, I gotta finish this video, so let's do some more Easter eggs from this episode. Well, before an Easter egg, here's a very weird fun fact I found out while researching this video, and that's that in the original storyboards for this episode, SpongeBob was going to paint a painting and give it to Squidward, and it was going to feature SpongeBob and Squidward standing behind a heart of love. Now this was drawn by storyboard revisionist Dylan Houston King, and when he posted it on Instagram, he included a certain tag, that being SquidBob, which is actually a reference to the character shipping of SpongeBob and Squidward, which pretty much features SpongeBob and Squidward in a romantic relationship. So I'm just pointing out that one of these storyboard artists literally referenced this, not in the show, but on their personal Instagram. So I thought I'd point that out. It's kind of funny. But back to the Easter eggs, as throughout this episode, SpongeBob helps, quote unquote helps. He doesn't really do a good job, but he tries to help Squidward feel better. And by the end of the episode, when he returns to work, Squidward goes through a bit of a transformation, as look.
I used to be sick of everything, but I'm not sick anymore. I've been plagued by toxins and stress built up over the years at this job, but SpongeBob washed those away.
As you can see, Handsome Squidward makes a reappearance in this episode. Handsome Squidward first appeared back in the episode The Two Faces of Squidward, where his face got all messed up and then he became beautiful. He actually looks very handsome. And it seems that the animators or writers intentionally referenced this at the ending of this episode. And there's actually a nice touch here, as this is like a double entendre, all right? This is like a double Easter egg. As if you look, Handsome Squidward has long blonde hair. And this itself is a callback to another episode of the original Fry Cook, where Squidward had long hair in the past until he lost it on the day that Jim quit working at the Krusty Krab. So yeah, 2 references in one, and that's really, really cool. One last fact I'm gonna mention before we wrap up this episode is that there's some reused audio here, as Patrick's scream when he falls from the window is actually reused from the episode Farmer Bob. Here's a side-by-side, here's the scream from Squidward's Sick Days.
Now to get rid of the other monkey on my back.
And here's the scream from Farmer Bob. And as you can see, they reused the same scream. It's not a big deal, but yeah, let's keep it moving. More Easter eggs.